Sometimes I wonder if the universe runs on some twisted lottery, one where the worst possible people get crowned HOA president, not the kind who actually care about the community, but the ones who treat the whole neighborhood like their own little kingdom. And I'll tell you right now, I'm convinced I broke the record for the wildest demand any of these suburban monarchs ever made. Picture this. You spend years designing and building your dream home, multi-million-dollar lakeside estate, poured your life and your soul into it. Then out of nowhere, you get a letter that says, you have 48 hours to knock down part of your house, or just move out altogether. For what? So the HOA can run a public footpath to the lake, straight through your living room. Yeah, you heard me right. And it only gets crazier from here. My place, which I called Serenity Point, wasn't just a house, it was family history. My grandfather bought the land back when the area was just wild woods and a big, shimmering lake, and when he handed it down to me, I felt this deep responsibility to honor that legacy. I'd spent my career in finance, long hours, high stakes, you name it, but I always dreamed of having a retreat, somewhere peaceful, where I could finally breathe. So I built a home that blended with the landscape. Nothing flashy, just huge windows overlooking the lake, tucked away from the world. The only neighbors were a development called Lakeside Harmony Estates, but they were a quarter-mile back, hidden behind a stand of old trees I refused to let anyone touch. That's how I liked it. Out of sight, out of mind. Then, just as I was starting to settle in, came the letterhead. Lakeside Harmony Estates Homeowners Association. President Brenda Milligan. The first letter was civil enough, some boilerplate about making sure construction debris wasn't marring the community. The house had been finished a year at that point, so I sent her a polite note back with a photo of my spotless yard and figured that was the end of it. Turns out, Brenda wasn't the type to let things go, especially not when she'd set her sights on something. I started hearing from my handyman, Gary, one of those guys who's seen everything, that there was talk of a new community initiative to give everyone better access to the lake. Thing was, only my property touched the good part of the shoreline. Their lake access was more like marsh access. Brenda apparently thought it was unfair that I got the views and the water. The official letter showed up by certified mail, because nothing says serious business like a trip to the post office and $5 for a signature. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive legalese. According to their HOA board, they'd voted to build a footpath and a recreational overlook. And their feasibility study, which I suspect was drawn up by Brenda on her dining room table, just happened to put the path right through my gardens, and, if you read the map right, maybe even a corner of my guest wing. I had 48 hours to sign off on this minor easement and agree to a demolition schedule or start packing up and vacating the premises. You know what I mean when I say I was floored? The gall was unreal. My family had owned this land for nearly a century, and here was Brenda, acting like the queen of the suburbs, telling me to get out for the greater good. The anger was real, but underneath it was something colder. See, what Brenda didn't know was I'd spent decades dealing with contracts and asset management, and if there's one thing I don't tolerate, it's a bully with a clipboard. So, I called Arthur Jenkins, my lawyer and a man whose patience makes him seem like he's been meditating since birth. After reading the letter, he chuckled and said, "Looks like your neighbors have ambitions way beyond their legal reach." That's when we got to work. I had every deed, every survey, every document going back to my grandfather's day, all neatly archived. Arthur dove into state HOA law, and I started looking into the history of the land. Turns out, the development behind me wasn't built on land they owned. They were leasing it from a company called Prestige Community Developers, which, in turn, was leasing it from my family. The HOA was just a committee of tenants. That was the first twist, and believe me, it wouldn't be the last. Getting their official documents was a bit of a dance. My polite requests were ignored, until Arthur sent a sharply worded letter citing state statutes. Then, like magic, a thick envelope landed on my doorstep. We spent a day combing through all their covenants and bylaws, but the real gold was in my grandfather's original lease with Prestige. He'd seen this kind of thing coming a mile away and had insisted on clauses that said any tenant association had to respect the peaceful enjoyment of my retained property or face stiff penalties, including termination of the whole lease. But the bombshell was in the maps. Not only did I own Serenity Point outright, but the land under every single house in Lakeside Harmony Estates was technically part of the original parcel. The roads, the clubhouse, even Brenda's own beige mansion. They were all on land my family owned. Brenda wasn't just barking up the wrong tree. She was barking up a tree I owned, and she was about to find out that tree had some serious bite. Arthur put together a formal complaint to the state HOA board and drafted a letter to Prestige community developers. Meanwhile, the 48-hour deadline ticked by, and I did nothing. Well, nothing except enjoy my coffee and watch Brenda's SUV cruise slowly past my driveway, her tinted windows hiding what I can only assume was a face full of rage. When they finally made their move, it was pure amateur hour. Brenda and two muscle-bound enforcers showed up, one slapping a bright orange violation sticker on my gate, the other filming it all on his phone. My own security cameras got every angle. I calmly walked out, phone in hand, and told them they had about 30 seconds to get off my property before I called the sheriff. Brenda sputtered, but they backed off, the sticker already peeling in the sun, a perfect metaphor for their entire power play. Prestige, as you'd expect, panicked when they got Arthur's letter. I explained, very clearly, that their tenants' actions were putting them in breach of their lease, which could cost them a year's rent. Plus, my grandfather had added a clause that let me trigger a rent review and increase in the event of serious nuisance. That's money, real money, and suddenly I had their full attention. Now, here's where the real twist comes in, a kind of poetic justice. Because of Brenda's antics, every resident of Lakeside Harmony Estates was about to see their rent skyrocket. Prestige called me within 24 hours, desperate to make amends. Brenda's little crusade, meant to get them all a slice of my lakefront, was about to cost them dearly. But Brenda, of course, wasn't ready to let go. She called an emergency HOA meeting to rally the troops, trying to paint herself as the martyr fighting the evil landlord. Arthur and I showed up, fashionably late. As Brenda whipped the room into a frenzy, Arthur stood up and laid out the facts. My client owns the land under your homes. You're not homeowners, you're tenants. Your HOA doesn't have the power to make demands on my client's property. In fact, all your actions have been illegal, and the penalties are coming down hard. The room went silent, then erupted. You did what? Someone shouted at Brenda. Now our rents are going up because of you. The look on Brenda's face, let's just say, it was worth the stress. After that, the HOA crumbled. The state ordered them to dissolve. Brenda's lease mysteriously wasn't renewed, and I watched her drive off, sunglasses askew, in a moving truck. Prestige renegotiated their lease, with much stricter terms and a hefty rent increase. Some residents left, unable to pay the higher costs, and the place got quieter, humbler. A few came to me later to apologize and ask for some kind of compromise, so I eventually agreed to let them have limited, controlled lake access, on my terms, with a keycard gate and no more drama. Looking back, I realized the whole episode was a masterclass in entitlement. Brenda honestly believed her will outweighed history, law, and simple decency. But sometimes, the biggest bullies aren't in boardrooms. They're right next door, waving a rulebook they don't even understand. The satisfaction I felt watching their little empire dissolve was immense. But the real victory was knowing I'd stood my ground, not just for me, but for anyone who's ever had to deal with a neighbor who thinks community means give me what I want. So, that's how I ended up being the landlord of an entire HOA and teaching a lesson that hit them right in the wallet. But what about you? What's the craziest thing you've ever seen an HOA or an entitled neighbor try to pull? Drop your story in the comments. I love a good tale of suburban drama. And hey, if you like this one, hit that like and subscribe for more real stories of when overreach meets its match. Who knows? Maybe your neighbor's antics will be next.